Robinson when he was talking.
Yeah, we have to.
I can hear Dr. Robinson, yes.
Okay, so
Because
we're
we only
set.
have a 2 set, so they got to build a 3 set.
A minute, and then Dr. Robinson's going to do an introduction, and then we're going to get started. All right, so we're ready for the countdown?
I'm ready.
Okay, 5, 4, 3. Urban agriculture and food sovereignty.
Action.
Welcome to the Insightful Journal, where we recognize that injustice in healthcare is the most egregious and most inhumane. Today, I have as my guests urban agriculture and food sovereignty experts, Dr. Jamie Green and Mike Green, the Think and Grow Farms. I had the opportunity to meet with them, and it was wonderful. So please, just tell me a little bit about what you're doing with urban agriculture and what is the Greens Farm.
Sure. So I'm happy and thank you for the invitation to communicate and to share knowledge. I am the co-founder of Think and Grow Farms here in Philadelphia. We have a couple of sites. Ours are indoor farms that are really focused on the Black holistic health model that you were referencing in a prior interview that I listened to on a previous podcast, which was excellent. I wanted to share that the reason that I got into urban farming, besides the fact that we're 8 or 9 generations as farmers, was that I'm a trained cognitive psychologist, and I started to see a decline in the ability of Black children in particular, and some other disadvantaged children, but primarily Black children, to receive and process information. So their brains were not really receiving information in the last 10 years the way they had been the 10 years before. And I think in many ways, I came to the conclusion that we were not able to answer a really critical question about getting Black children into science, technology, engineering, and math, which is where my research focuses. Our children were not able to pay attention for 2 reasons. One, all of the toxins that they were exposed to from a very young age to, in some cases, they never move away from it, were incapacitating what we call executive function. Their brains were not really able to receive and process complex amounts of information. And I think the second thing that we noticed was that their diet and nutrition wasn't building up their capacity to process. So on the basis of that, I'd worked at a university for about 15 years designing STEM programs, particularly for African-American children. And what we were seeing was some would really catch on and make things happen, some could not. And much of it we decided to focus on maybe if we could impact the quality of their soil and the quality of the food that's grown, we would have some way of talking about really productive, healthy Black children for the next few generations. So I'll stop there and let Mark Green, my husband and partner, share his motivation for coming into this space.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, Dr. Roberts.
Thank you.
I'm Mark Green, co-founder of Think and Grow Farms. We started out with an agricultural training and hydroponic and aquaponic growing in 2018. We started out because I noticed that with climate change, things were changing rapidly, and pairing that with the average age of a farmer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania being 65 years of age and no clear succession plan, I knew we had to do something to make sure we had access to people of color that had access to food that was clean, nutritious, and organic. So coupled between climate change and the impacts and some of the environmental factors that we touched on a little bit earlier, I'm a North Philadelphia native, and in the area where I was raised, my elementary school is now about 100 years old. So some of the neurotoxins that we experience, be it lead or asbestos, some of these chronic conditions started when we were very young, and they did have an impact on people's health, quality of life, and even ability to learn. So we started looking at, if there's a food desert there and you don't have access to this food, how can we bring access to this food to people who are most vulnerable? So that's sort of my motivation for getting involved in this. And if we can grow indoors and control our food supply and have healthy, nutritious food, I think that would just make things a lot better or at least sort of level the playing field for people that were already behind the 8 ball before they started.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm very excited to have both of these guests here. Can you tell me a little bit about your plan for urban garden, and how is it that people can actually grow fresh fruits and vegetables in their home? Because I'm sure the listeners would love to learn a little bit about that. So please tell me a little bit about your systems and how we can actually do gardening in our homes. Because we don't have a lot of land, so we have to have some other way to do it. So tell me about that.
Well, we have systems that are in place, and for the most part, we built 3 indoor labs. 2 of them are USDA registered farms. We did a proof of concept during the COVID pandemic. It was actually 4 generations of our family got together, and I learned trial and error. I am a project manager who was trained in structural engineering, and I learned a lot about, I guess, some of the rudimentary parts of mechanical engineering, structural engineering, electrical engineering. And we took these electrical parts. We had the fluid dynamics theory going with the water that you had to go through, and the structural elements to keep things together. So basically, we took hydroponic systems, which consisted of a reservoir, a pump, some lights, and some growing shells, all without soil. And I found a way to put them together. A lot of the PVC came from a big box store, and most of the fittings came from its competitor. So it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of power tools, a lot of mistakes, but we found a way to use these systems. They've been catching on for quite some time, and the theory behind hydroponics goes way back. I mean, even back to the aqueducts. They've been around since the beginning of time. This is important for us because in an urban setting, I did hear you mention urban gardens, and about 5 years ago, we did a study. We did a survey of 5 zip codes in the Philadelphia area that had mostly African-American people, some of the most vulnerable people in the population. And we took soil samples from those areas. And we took the soil samples and had them analyzed at a certified lab. And they had some of the highest levels of metals in there that you could find. So the challenge with that was that if you have a community garden and you have soil that has high levels of toxins or metals in them, by the time you grow your food and the food gets to your plate, the metals are bioaccumulative. And when you have lead, beryllium, arsenic in there, by the time it gets to your plate and on your fork, it's so much stronger than it was before it started. So we kind of stayed away from that option with community gardens to try to grow indoors. So you can grow indoors simply with a small pump to keep your water recirculating, a reservoir, which could even be a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket. It could be a big mixing bowl, and some lights, and just some TLC.
That's very interesting, because I noticed that when I worked for the city that there was high amounts of chemicals. In fact, I have an old house in West Philly, and I had a plumber come out, and the plumber told me that he had to put a new leader line into my house because he said that the line was made out of lead and that the law code didn't allow it anymore. So he said, you're going to have to spend thousands of dollars replacing that line coming into your house because it's made out of lead. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And then the other issue, of course, is think about it. Just maybe like 10 or so years ago, we had unleaded gasoline. So there were
Yes,
like thousands of cars that uses lead in their gas. So you have to wonder what happened to all that lead. It went into the
That's
soil.
right.
So it's certainly
That's a-
there. And as you know, lead is a very serious problem in terms of behavior, violence, and other issues. I know the psychologists can certainly talk about that. It makes stunts
Absolutely.
your growth, all of that. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, what I was seeing in my research was that we were trying to understand again the kids' inability to focus, and a lot of people were talking about, well, it must be the technology; they're just distracted. And so and my thought was, and I also knew kids were coming into our Saturday academies hungry. And so we started to provide, some traditional pizzas and that kind of stuff, but we also started to provide some greens. And what I started to notice was the healthier the food, the more they were able to stay on task. And so, my inspiration was a gentleman named Dr. Asa Hilliard, one of the greatest educational psychologists ever in the world. And he said, listen, holistic education, creating a high-performing Black child requires understanding the totality of the environment they're living in. Lead is a neurotoxin. There are others. As Mark said, we did some preliminary research through a Department of Agriculture grant, and I want to reiterate for everybody out there, it took us a lot of years to get to where we are, but it's a hard journey, but it's not impossible. And we started out, as he said, by training ourselves how to grow indoors with the specific intent of growing the kind of food that we knew our folks would eat. So we would grow, if it was a Caribbean community, we were growing like callaloo, Jamaican spinach, I guess is the other word for it. We were growing saffron. We were growing anything that we thought would help, receive and process information and mitigate the neurotoxins. I really can't emphasize enough for every mom out there, every young lady, every father who's really trying to understand what's happening with their children. Get your child checked for lead, because I think in some cases, they're very quick to put them into the Ritalin community when maybe there's some holistic healing that could help mitigate some of the confusion. But again, we started to notice, Dr. Robinson, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, the number of children who had IEPs, the number of children who needed support, academic support, has steadily grown. The number of children who have autism, the number of children who have, just disparities that are really, again, cognitively focused, has started to grow, particularly among Black boys. And so my thought was, well, is there a way through nutrition and thinking about the extraordinary people like back in the day from Dick Gregory, Dr. Sebi, here locally, Dr. Wyatt, there were just so many naturopathic doctors who were coming online at the same time. My research was showing we have a problem. It wasn't even Houston we have a problem, it was Philly, we have a problem. And the more our children are exposed to these toxins, and you talked about lead gas, the Environmental Protection Agency has designated Philadelphia as one of the most high toxin areas for the trucks that are going through, right? We are strategically located on I-95. So the kids and the parents, everybody's exposed to truck fumes. They're exposed to the prior manufacturing in the soil. So when it comes to growing food now, as Mark was saying, we know how to grow food indoors. And if you are going to grow food outdoors, you have to check, just like you check your children, check your soil. Philadelphia has access to any number of resources. We have the USDA here that will check your soil. You have Penn State Extension will check your soil. Any number of places will check the quality of the soil. And then there's compost that's available to improve the soil. So the number one thing we say for people growing outside, in your backyard, in a couple of buckets, and it could be something as small as a Walmart tote. Use a mixture of organic soil with some compost in your raised bed or in your tote. And that's if you want to grow outside. If you want to grow inside, as Mark said, we can teach you how to grow with something like a Home Depot bucket with a lid on it. And all you have to do is put your plants in there, let the roots go down into the water that's inside the bucket, and just leave it alone. So it's a very what we call passive indoor agriculture as well as active outdoor agriculture. But no matter what, we need to find the types of plants that can mitigate the kind of cognitive disruption that's happening because the environment is toxic.
Okay, that's very interesting. Now, you mentioned something that really comes back to home because I'm a product of the Philadelphia school system, and I'll never forget it, that the guidance counselors and people at my school, they told me that I was overactive and had AHD, hyperactivity disorder. And fortunately, my parents wouldn't go for it. So they said, oh, no. They said, we're not putting them on no Ritalin. They wouldn't allow it to do it. But I remember that I was a product of it myself. And so what my parents did was they probably didn't understand the foods like you do, but they did know how to put my attention to something else. So they made me, play music, go and join teams and all of that stuff, so that they directed my energy into a productive means. Because I wasn't able to sit still in a classroom because, I was a really active boy, and many times I think it's not even reasonable to think that the kids could sit that long in a class. And it's
It
lazy
is
from the
not
standpoint of the
normal.
teachers just saying, "Oh, give them that, and I'll make them be quiet."
That's right. That's exactly right. There was a research study done, and again, it was Learning While Black was the name of the book that was published, maybe 15 years ago. And it talked about the energy level of Black boys and girls, and it sort of aggregated it mapped out who had the most energy from high to low. So in that book, Learning While Black, you had Black boys had the highest level of energy, and young white girls had the lowest level of energy. Well, the majority of teachers in the United States are young white women who weren't culturally aware. It's not that they couldn't teach the kids, they just weren't aware that this is a high energy level population. And so their culture told them we have to control and calm that down. And so unfortunately, parents, really good parents like yours, great parents, frankly, um, have sort of started to go into another space because now we have people, and I'm not a big person talking about teenage parents. A good parent is a person who has somebody around them that can help guide them. And what we saw happening that again, we saw moms who want the best for their children, but they didn't know that the food that they were giving the child, the hugs, the stuff from the corner store, was causing their kids to be even more hyper when they went to school. So it was just a vicious cycle. And so our thought was, well, again, we need to introduce good parenting skills with good parenting options for both the parent's health and the child's health. And that starts with clean, organic food for this physical body that is going to be going into these different environments. So I can appreciate that you had a great parent. My mother was the same way. We weren't allowed to be tracked.
Right.
And when somebody told me that my firstborn son was educably mentally retarded because he was hyper, I homeschooled for the next 5 years, and now he's got a master's in finance. So sometimes as a parent, we have to do the best we can, but also trust your gut.
Yes.
And put good things in your gut.
That's right. That's right. This has really been very exciting. I had the opportunity to see, I went to a program that was at Vox, a community center, several weeks ago. So I actually got a chance to look at some of the things and got the chance to meet some of the community people who are involved in this. So I think that this is very exciting. And this information really has to get out there on how people can do more of this. I know I have a little garden myself. Mine's is hydroponic, and I made mine myself. I made it out of Home Depot buckets. I got those 5-gallon buckets, and I put like a little
Right.
basket in it, and I got an
That's
aquarium pump. The pump is
That's a great
circulating
start.
air through it. So
Great
I'm
start.
growing basil, thyme, oregano, all of that. I got a whole herb garden, and I
So
also grew tomatoes too.
well, is it medicinal herbs, Doc?
Well, I haven't done a medicinal garden yet, but I know that's a lot of people are interested in medicinal gardens. So the College of Physicians here in Philadelphia has a program that they do on medicinal plants. Because one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that I'm an allopath. An allopath is a plant doctor. So an MD, when you look at it, they're plant doctors. And think about it. All of the medicines that we use, they are derived from plants. So, for example, if it's a pain medication, it's derived from opium, which is a poppy. If it is a antibiotic, it's developed from a fungus. Penicillin and all that's from a fungus. You see, aspirin, that's from a bark of a tree, of the willow tree. So all of the medicines that we take are directly related to plants. Now, of course, we refine them and we test the quantity and we have dosage and all of that. But when you look at the basic components, they're all. Here, another thing, Valium. Valium is from a root of a plant. So all of the medicines that we take are that. So they have a garden downtown, it's done in conjunction with the Horticultural Society. And
That's right.
they grow medicinal plants. Now, I know my grandmother, she was a Native American. And she believed in that. They would have roots and tonics, and so like every spring they would give us a tonic to clean us out, like they would call it spring cleaning, and we would take a tonic. It was made like out of like sassafras and some other types of things, and it would like just purge your system. They said of all the chemicals and stuff that you had acquired over the winter. So I'm very familiar with that.
I think our ultimate goal is to, again, getting back to Mark's original point, we've received and raised quite a bit of money to teach people how to grow from the simplest to the most complex. Our training facilities are designed to introduce technologies that people can use as the climate disrupts. So if, for example, hurricanes and tornadoes are to continue in Philadelphia, people will be able to grow indoors, underground, and keep the access to food going. I was up at Hunting Park yesterday. Amazing work with North 10 up there and the Hunting Park Community Garden, Sister Wadia. And the food access issues are growing in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Philadelphia has a very rich history of community gardens, horticultural environments. Now there are more pop-up orchards. And so we are always going to be advocates for clean soil, clean growing outside. But we're also very clear that there are extraordinary opportunities, like we saw today, where the Environmental Protection Agency Environmental Justice Initiative has come into Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with a $14 million plus another 10. So they're $24 million right now to train Black boys and girls, Latino boys and girls, everybody, indigenous folks who are still in Pennsylvania, to plant trees, become agroforestry folks, to become medicinal experts, to go into nursing, to become allopaths, as you said. So this is an amazing time for the community to not just be recipients of things, but to take control, reclaim agriculture as our thing. It's one of the reasons some people were brought here because of their expertise in agriculture. So I would say that that's what drives and motivates, at least me. I can't speak for Mark all the time. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I don't.
Well, my
this
motivation
project,
is definitely there.
Go ahead.
No, my motivation is definitely there. One of the things that motivates me and excites me the most is that there are huge opportunities in agriculture. When people hear agriculture, they just automatically think, oh, if I can't grow, there's no room for me. There's so many countless opportunities for someone to start a small business. I'm not even talking about jobs, but if someone wants to take a small business and find a way to just be an entrepreneur, they can do that with the growing portion of it. They can do that in the processing space. They can do that in the packaging or manufacturing space. They can do it with logistics, delivery, and sales. There's so many opportunities in this one big growing business and so much room. I think it's a great time for us to diversify it. And while we're doing it, people can walk away with the skills to grow their own food and have a better quality of life. It goes back to that old adage, if you give a man a fish, he eats for the night. You teach him how to fish, he eats forever. And I think that we can teach people how to grow in their own homes, and they can control their own food supplies. I think they'll have a much better quality of life and not have the stress to worry about what if I don't have the money to go to Whole Foods or if I live in the food desert. You always have control over your food supply source. You have options now because you have a huge growing industry, and you just have a better overall quality of life. I mean, one of the things that I noticed where I grew up at was between the two rivers in Philadelphia. And I know in World War II, there were a couple of, quite a few factories that popped up just to make sure that they had enough supplies to send to the troops, to support the troops during World War II, between the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers. Unfortunately, those are densely populated areas with Black people for the most part. And they were good, ideal spots strategically to do all your manufacturing processes because you had either river where you could put something on a rail car, on a ship, and get it out to where it had to go. Unfortunately, those manufacturing processes left a lot of environmental concerns behind. And some of those fields where we played. And I remember I remember vividly playing baseball on the field, and what we had as a pitcher's mound was actually a steel tank that had oil in it. So some of the stuff that was done behind, you know, they had good intentions, but the environment wasn't treated very well, and that's why we did have the issues that we talked about with the, the environmental concerns and the environmental justice. And quite frankly, some of these people are still suffering from it. And right now,
Yes,
we
yes,
can't
most
reverse
certainly.
some of these exposures. We can't reverse them, but we can try to make them better going forward. And that's my motivation.
Yeah. It's very interesting that you mentioned that because we were looking at it from the standpoint that this may be one way to reclaim some of the abandoned spaces that are in the city. Because one of the things that we learned is that you can grow in a foot what you could grow in an acre if you do like vertical farming. So like many of these warehouses and places like that would be perfect places where you could grow, various herbs or vegetables in the hydroponic or the aquaculture, environment. In fact, one of the things that is interesting is that Pennsylvania now is the #1 producer of hydroponic lettuce. They have a huge farms of lettuce, very popular, and these you can basically grow this anywhere, with the right types of equipment and stuff like that. So this is very exciting, and it's also, as you were talking about, a way for us to sort of reclaim our farms, because at one time, black farmers were one of the predominant, groups of agricultures in the country, and I never forget reading about Carver. And the wonderful things that he did with agriculture, rotating crops and keeping the topsoil from blowing away. I mean, they're inventing new ways to process peanuts and other types of things where you can get more uses out of them. So there's a whole history behind this, and it's certainly a legacy that I'm very excited to see that people are building on that legacy and continuing it. So thank you so much.
Thank
So tell
you.
me a little bit more about your system. We still have a few minutes to go, and I'd like to know a little bit more about your perspective in terms of food sovereignty. So we haven't talked about that. So this is very important for us to be independent because we know that there are cycles that occur. And,
Yeah.
We're going through global warming, also probably headed for some type of depression or monetary correction that's coming as well. I mean, I've been very fortunate that I've never experienced it in my lifetime, but I do know that my parents talked about the depression areas and how they had to get food. And I remember they had a plot in the back where they grew collard greens and all of that kind of stuff in the back of the yard down in West Philly. That was what they called the old bottom or the black bottom. So tell me a little bit about food sovereignty, because this is important.
So the food sovereignty discussion in Pennsylvania, and certainly across the country, but in Pennsylvania specifically, is because Pennsylvania is one of the most powerful agriculture states in the United States. It's the only state that has its own farm bill. Everybody else has to wait for the feds. Pennsylvania is charting its own course because it's had so many people who could control their own food. And so in the part of the great migration from the south to the north, a lot of people behave as if urban agriculture is new, but it's 100 years old, with people who brought their farming skills from down south up to the north, Detroit, Philly, Baltimore, as they tried to get away from challenges in the south. So food sovereignty, though, really requires you to have control or ownership of land. And what has happened right now is that, to your point, there's a very dynamic tension between developers who need to build affordable housing because there's not enough housing apparently, and then people who need to eat. The value of agriculture and controlling your own food can't be overstated. We have farmers, as Mark said, who are aging out at the average age of 67. So the idea of what we did was we use hydroponic indoor farming for year-round growing. We have the capacity to grow about 2 tons of food per year across all of our sites. What we do, though, is we really focus more on training people how to use the equipment. We use traditional hydroponic equipment. We could do aquaculture. We encourage people in terms of food sovereignty to be entrepreneurial. So you can grow food, but I would share with you that if you're going to grow food, grow flowers and grow herbs as the high value crops, because quite frankly, growing indoors is an extremely expensive proposition. Even if it takes less real estate, the energy to run those systems could really be impactful unless you get solar. So the idea would be food sovereignty is to look around, find out where the food deserts are, see if there's some land that you can lease, even if you can't own it, put it on a 99-year lease, that's 4 generations, and start to grow crops that are necessary to feed people, to heal people, and to feed people, and then crops that you can sell to the common market because that will bring in the revenue for you to keep your operation going. I'll just land there and let Mark pick up from there in terms of the entrepreneurship opportunities beyond just growing that you mentioned before.
That's a great point. I mean, it can be cost prohibitive, and finding creative ways to offset your costs are always good. But once the food is grown, the critical time is the time it is transported from harvest to its destination point for processing. So some of the opportunities are just even transport. If there's someone who has a transport service that can take food from the orchard or from the harvest directly to the processing place, there's an opportunity there. There's a need for drivers to do that. Once it's at the processing place, we can either freeze dry it or dehydrate it. And what we've learned with our research is that if you freeze dry or dehydrate food without gas, without chemicals, it's still stable and retains 97% of its nutrients. But instead of having a 4-day shelf life, you now have a 1-year shelf life, and you still have nutritious food that you have access to. So time is of the essence. It's a really time-sensitive business, but if you can get it to the processing, there's opportunities to do that. And then once it's processed and finished, it's packaging. You can distribute it from the processing plant to the wholesalers. There's opportunities for transportation. There's opportunities for the processing itself. There's the distribution, sales. There are a lot of opportunities in that whole value chain system where there are holes and a need for people. And those create some pretty unique, quite frankly, lucrative business opportunities. And I think it's a good idea to try to get some of our folks into that stuff to get a little more, make it a little more diverse, but it gives us some pretty good opportunities.
And I know one of the areas that a lot of people have at least looked at is the whole CBD and marijuana, which is now illegal. And there certainly are opportunities where people are growing, the actual plants, and many of them have to be in controlled environments. So indoors is probably a much better way to grow them. So that's another area. I'm certainly you've looked at that.
Yeah, they're the experts. Some of the best indoor growers in the country are the cannabis growers. Cannabis for medicinal use still has a very long runway, hopefully, for higher quality plant product. CBD, the market's frankly dropped out of a lot of CBD, again, for the mid and low level tiers. So unless it's prescription grade, we're not really seeing a lot of movement there. Where we are seeing movement is on the other side of cannabis with industrial hemp. And industrial hemp is the low THC, low to no THC version of the plant that is being used now for building materials, can be used for textiles, et cetera, et cetera. So Pennsylvania is focused on bringing the industrial hemp side online more than it is on the cannabis side. The long game is on the industrial hemp side for people like us who want to get into, who are harmed by the cannabis laws, but now want to get back into this space. It's on the non-THC side. And so that's where we're seeing millions and millions of investment going to that side now.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. Yes.
Some of the bigger car manufacturers now, I know, for instance, BMW is using hemp resin in their bumpers now on, I think, their new 3 and 4 series of vehicles that came out in 2024. So you have that, and somebody, I think Toyota or Honda is using it in the seat belts. It's a natural material that's very strong.
Yes.
And I think that the hemp market is taking off in a lot of different ways. It's a crop that, most of the proponents will say that it takes 6 weeks to grow a hemp crop, but in order to get the same amount of yield for building material for a tree, it'll take 20 years. So there's a lot of areas where we can get people involved and learn different facets of how to get involved in indoor agriculture. I just want to be clear that when people say urban agriculture, it goes well beyond community gardens. There's so many opportunities there; they're almost endless. And I think that we should try to get people a little more educated, a little more involved, and they can get some more information by going on our website, which is www.thinkandgrowfarms.com. That's www.thinkandgrowfarms.com.
Okay, so I'd like all of the listeners to write that down. If you want further information, there is a website that you can go to. And in fact, I think that we'll probably be able to actually write that in down in the bottom so they'll have that information. So that's very exciting to hear that there's a resource for information where people can find out more about it.
Yes. We're constantly maintaining that. We're going to keep it updated, and we have a few webinars that might show people how to just get introduced to urban agriculture, how to start with their own seeds, how to create a home system. All those resources are available, and they'll be continually get updated. And we'll try to keep the site as up to date as possible. And we have an info at thinkandgrowfarms.com email. If people have questions, we try to get back to them within one business day. So hopefully someone will take a look at it, get something out of it, and we can help some people out.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there's probably a market, as you say, to think at the expanded view, even for the supplies and materials that are needed in order to set up the farms. I mean, I know that I go on Amazon and all sorts of people are selling all sorts of devices and do things like that. And I even wonder if there's any one way or one system that's better than another. Well, what do you have to say about that in terms of the systems that people use? Which ones are most efficient or the best ways to go about it?
Well, I don't want to weasel out of this question, but it depends on what you're growing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you recall the vertical systems are a lot better for viney plants, the strawberries, the tomatoes, because the vines like to reach out and spread out. You don't want to put them in a horizontal system because the vines will reach out and start strangling each other and not giving you a good finished product. So again, it depends on the crop. Most of the leafy things are good for flat horizontal hydroponic systems. Some of the viney stuff I think is better for a vertical system, and that's probably the same thing hydroponic. You can control the lighting. The beauty of the hydroponic systems are that we have LED lights that have the same intensity as the sun, so we can have the lights on for 24 hours if we want to. That gives you the same amount of sunlight that you would get in 2 days in the summertime. So we can control the lighting intensity and the lighting spectrums. So I think that a vertical system for I think a vertical system will probably give you a better yield. I just think I like those better personally. But again, I believe a hydroponic system is a lot more efficient than an aquaponic system or some of the others.
And I think the other part of this is it depends on the amount of volume you're trying to grow. So there are robotics-driven systems now, to Mark's point. There are horizontals that we call bunk beds, so you can really stack them up very, very high. You were talking about the indoor lettuce. There's a huge 200,000 square foot farm called Bowery Farms up in Pennsylvania. I will say, Doc, that again, the valuation of indoor farms went from about $3 billion earlier this year down to about $1 billion.
Ooh.
So the market or venture capitalists are pulling the funds back because, again, the operating costs have not caught up to the ROI. And that's why we encourage people, start small. Even if you want to sell to your neighborhood, your community, start small with raised beds, with small hydroponic systems. If you just want to grow for your family, learn how it works, because again, it is a $3 trillion industry. It is the fastest growing industry in the world. And to Mark's point, there are a lot of opportunities in a lot of different places. And I want to reiterate, it's not all just growing food. There are people who are doing amazing things with the waste products. So if somebody grows a whole bunch of apples and there's apples left on the ground, the second crop is called gleaning. They go take those messy apples and make applesauce, right? And so thinking through, it's very important to look at all the different ways you can make money out of the investment, because seeds are not cheap, especially organic seeds are not cheap. Fertilizer's not cheap, whether you're using synthetic fertilizers inside or you're trying to do something organic. Whether you're trying to grow fish, right? Fish or shrimp in aquaculture, you can do that anywhere as well. So depending on where you are located and what the needs are, again, you can start very small, bring in an extra $10,000 a year if you want to do that, or some people want to do $10,000 a month growing microgreens. So there's any variety of ways. As Mark said, it depends on what you want to grow. I always encourage folks who come through our training, though, to grow at home, practice at home, starting with very small, simple systems, and then continue to evolve up. And as you said, you can find things on Amazon or Alibaba. The technology out here is almost there's more technology available than food. There are people making all kinds of stuff to grow with. You have to know how to grow food. The technology doesn't matter if you don't know how to grow.
Yes.
So
That's
start
exciting.
small, right? Start small and learn.
And I find that
so
really
this has
exciting.
been very exciting.
Mhm.
We're going to be, I guess, winding down now. We've had a very interesting discussion. And I look forward to actually following up with you in the future and learn how things are going with your urban gardens and the Think Grow farm. So we'll certainly have you back on our show, and we're going to get some follow-up in terms of what's been going on in this field. So thank you so much for joining us on the Insightful Journal for this most interesting discussion. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
Robert.
you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
You're welcome.
Be well.
Okay.
All right.
Is that better?
Yes. Much. Okay.
Make sure that you're going.
Here you go.
Did we get enough footage?
That's me. That's me.
Did we get enough footage?
Oh yeah, we're
Yes.
doing fine. We're doing
Yes.
fine.